This is Malik, and on behalf of Cantata, Vizient, and S&P Global Market Intelligence, I would like to welcome you all and say thank you for attending today's virtual roundtable titled The Technology Imperative for Professional Services, Consolidate Technology with the Full Project Lifecycle in Mind. Just a few quick housekeeping items before we get started. To ask a question, simply type it in the question box on your screen. We will get to as many as we can during the Q&A session. The presentation slides are available for download in the resource section in the console. And finally, the on-demand version of this virtual roundtable will be available shortly after the live event concludes. Leading off today's discussion will be Chris Marsh, who is Research Director at S&P Global Market Intelligence. Joining Chris, we have Ken Ringdahl, who is Chief Technology Officer at Cantata. And finally, we have Grant Anderson, who is Vice President and General Manager, Operations Enablement at Vizient. We welcome our speakers today. And with that, I'll turn it over to Chris to kick off the event.
Great, thanks Malik, and welcome everybody to the webinar today. We have a lot of interesting research, data, and perspectives to share. As you'll have guessed from that bio slide, we're going to be doing a number of things over the next hour or so. I'm going to be kicking us off speaking for just 10 minutes or so, sharing some of the research that we collect in S&P. That's going to hopefully lay the foundation for the main part of this session, which will primarily be Ken and Grant sharing their views on the professional services industry, how decision makers in the industry should be thinking about technology, what the upsides and downsides are of different technology approaches, what a platform covering the project lifecycle looks like, and why it's a particular imperative to be thinking through some of these issues where we stand right now. Okay, so without further ado, let's get started. So we collect an awful lot of data within S&P Global. We're continuously doing surveys amongst employees and technology decision makers, business leaders of different kinds. This first slide, we're looking at some of the survey data amongst our employees, and it really shows how many of the technology challenges that they face are to do with silos, right? It's having to work across a growing number of sort of pervasive silos, and that poses all kinds of technology challenges from the lack of good quality integrations across the different applications people are being expected to work in and out of, different difficulties in collaborating across different niche apps, no one app doing enough of what they need it to do. This data's been consistent year on year, and for those working in the professional services setting, it's no different. A lot of these challenges are particularly acute now, I would say, with the growing amount of remote work and the pressure to build more resilience into operations that has come from the series of shocks most businesses have had to cope with over the past 2 to 3 years. Really, there is pressure on teams to more quickly align, to adjust their workflows to different business priorities, to generate good quality data to inform decision making, to be responsive to what seems, I think, for many companies to be volatile and changing customer requirements, and generally to operate in a more agile manner than maybe was the expectation sort of 4 or 5 years ago. In this context, we're seeing businesses having to facilitate higher value kinds of cross-functional collaboration in the professional services industry, and we'll talk about this when we get into the discussion after this short presentation. That could be between service execution teams and their peers in finance, maybe legal, operations, IT. And really, as teams look to improve their delivery efficiency, their throughput, and potentially rethinking the overall experience they're providing for their customers, there really is a need to bring more context, more collaboration, more control, more easily around where their projects and portfolios are managed. And obviously that's something that's challenging to do when you are working in and out of different tooling silos. So currently, most employees face a consistent set of friction points. Again, this is pretty consistent data. This visual also comes from the same employee survey. These are the 5 things that they are saying are now harder because of the past few years' disruption. So if you think of everything that's happened, obviously the pandemic period, this shift which many companies have undertaken to more remote working, maybe adopting a hybrid model, the macroeconomic strains that is affecting most industries. A lot of what we've seen over the past couple of years has really accelerated digital transformations from, what was already an imperative sort of 2019 to, being, even more important to speed up. And, of course, a lot of this disruptive context has caused customers of, those working in professional services settings to pivot in their own business model, to change their priorities, to need to, react to different requirements that they're experiencing. And so, the things that employees are saying are harder now. It's not having clarity around goals and responsibilities. It's, difficulties getting on the same page with your peers, making sure you're aligned. It's being able to focus on your work without constant interruptions and distractions. This has always been a pain point. I'm pretty sure we can all relate to that. This has been, consistent for years, of course, but, somewhat exaggerated by the shift to more remote working. What did we all do? We all jumped into even more Zoom, and, there is this feeling that there is just that many more distractions that people face and obstacles to actually going and doing deep work, focused work. It's also not being able to find the information they need. Lots of companies have had to change their workflows to adapt to this sort of new operational environment they find themselves in. Just finding basic information potentially around project specs, governance, guardrails, basic documentation, org charts, whatever it might be. This is something that employees say they now find harder than even was the case before. And that has also historically been a consistent challenge. And, the result of a lot of this is that, teams need new, more fit for purpose workflows for the changes that have come, with all of this, all of this period over the past couple of years. And, there are new expectations, I would suggest, from, customers of those professional services firms and teams, when it comes to, responsiveness and the need to have a good experience working with their partners. These frustrations are, however, being recognized on the technology supply side. As technology analysts in S&P, we think long and hard about, not just the sort of micro things that are happening, but the big macro shifts affecting SaaS and enterprise software. And, this is an articulation of just one of the ways we look at this. In our estimation, we are a few years into the start of a significant shift in enterprise technology toward more consolidated kinds of platform. For the first sort of 20 years of SaaS, the narrative was predominantly one of best of breed, right? So this is the basic idea that you choose the applications that perform some specific function the best, and then you stitch them together via APIs and integrations. That in many ways created the silo problem that has led to a lot of those friction points that employees now face. The number of applications predominantly driven by SaaS coming to market has really outpaced the ability of businesses to meaningfully stitch them together. And, businesses are now under pressure to think more strategically about their workforce technologies. And so we do see many more of them thinking in, more of a hub and spokes mentality. So what are those strategic systems that you really want to deploy amongst your workforce? And what are those other maybe more niche but necessary applications that need to integrate into those core systems? The impulse on the supply side has correspondingly shifted to more of a best of suite, best of platform positioning. We're seeing different capabilities that previously defined separate sort of application categories be consolidated into more comprehensive kinds of platform solution. This is happening across a whole swathe of different application categories, not just impacting those technologies deployed in a professional services setting. And really, we anticipate this sort of consolidating trend to be the prevailing one as we look into the future. Much of this thinking we sort of originated 4 years ago when we began to see the sort of growing evidence of this shift. Back then, the sort of main question we were being asked by clients when we talked about this was, what are those flavors of, different sort of consolidated platforms going to be? I think we have a clearer sense now, of that. And of course, we're talking in this webcast in particular about professional services as an industry where we equally see this trend impacting. So, in this kind of second era of consolidation, what can we expect? I mean, we already see this consolidation happening across different workloads and life cycles. We see it amongst marketers. They're not particularly the audience we're here to talk about today, but we see it impacting them. That there are new kinds of platform technology giving them more seamless ways to manage campaigns and collaborations. We see it amongst product teams as well, where things like product insights and analytics are coming into more of a platform experience where either there wasn't existing tech to support those things, or it was done out of, Excel and other kind of generic horizontal solutions. And of course, amongst professional services teams, which is really our audience today, of course, we see technologies beginning to consolidate the full project life cycles. We could mention other spaces where this is happening. It's really an across-the-board trend. This is, of course, a sort of new way of thinking about it. It's going to provide benefits to teams, but it does pose questions and challenges that business and technology leaders need to think through. So what are those core systems? And what are the spokes that need to connect into them? What workflows can these consolidated platforms provide, including with that combination of other apps that may be needed to be integrated with? How does a consolidating technologies that supports the full life cycle change how you generate, manage, and get value out of data? That's becoming a question that many businesses are thinking much more about now. And really importantly, what does all of this mean, both from a user experience point of view, but also obviously from a customer experience point of view, because this potentially changes the way that professional services teams can interact with their own customers. And so just before I sort of summarize and we open up to the discussion and bring Ken and Grant in to share their views, I just wanted to zoom out for a second, actually. This data is also from our employee survey, this time from our employee engagement survey. What the data on the left shows is the stack-ranked set of statistically significant drivers of employees' overall positive engagement. So if you think about all the different kinds of things that can make an employee feel engaged in their role or not, this is from our survey what show up as the statistically strongest drivers of positive engagement. And as you can see from the second and the seventh, really technology has a huge role to play here. And it's probably worth just restating that of all of the different things that can drive positive engagement, technology is the second strongest driver. We know from our research that engagement unlocks a host of other business outcomes, from innovation to skilling to creativity to culture within organizations. And so really this discussion today isn't just about technology. It's not just about productivity even. It's about the overall experience your teams have and the role that technologies that you choose can play in supporting a whole swathe of different business outcomes, including many of those human ones, beyond productivity. Just drilling down on that on the right-hand side, this is really sort of supporting evidence of this. We ask a question in our survey, which is something along the lines of, if nothing else was different other than the guarantee of working out of a better day-to-day tech stack, so, provision with better applications, better tools, more thought put into how they work together, how likely would you be to leave your current job and move to another organization? The numbers, as you can see on the right, are pretty high. I mean, even amongst engaged employees who otherwise enjoy what they're doing, still a quarter would say this is a big enough deal for me that, yes, I would likely go and work somewhere else if this could be guaranteed. Now, of course, there are no guarantees in life, but this shows the extent to which technology is driving, things like talent, retention, talent recruitment. And as you can see amongst disengaged employees, of which there are more now than there were pre-pandemic, given all of the impacts that have hit the workforce and continue to do so, 38% of that cohort of disengaged employees say that, yeah, if they could be guaranteed, a less frustrating day, working with better quality tools where, it's a more seamless kind of experience, then they would very likely consider going somewhere else. So, this is a really important sort of context, I think, for this overall discussion. And then finally, just to briefly summarize, this is just the last piece of content I'll share before we seg into the discussion. So really just to summarize, this is a shift that's underway towards more consolidated software platforms. This is something we've been tracking for a number of years. We see more and more evidence of it year on year of how this is happening. These platforms are ultimately coming to market to better synthesize, information, data, and people and workflows in a way that, the sort of, growing estate of point solutions finds it very difficult to do. This is a mindset shift, I would suggest, for technology decision makers. It's an experience shift for users and for customers. We're seeing this prominently impact across project and portfolio management professions. And, really for the technologists out there, in our view, this is really the next turn in the sine curve of software. It's here to stay, in other words. And, really it's a response to the prevailing need amongst workforces to move quicker, move with more focus, move with more purpose. So hopefully with that context setting, we can seg into the discussion. So let me bring Ken and Grant in to hear their perspectives. Ken, maybe if I throw this first question to you. So, considering these findings, considering these shifts we're seeing on the sort of technology side, how should decision makers in the professional services industry be thinking about taking advantage of this shift? Maybe you can share some perspectives on that.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Yeah, certainly appreciate the opportunity to be here as a sort of a technology leader, software, someone with a strong software background. I love talking about enterprise software and software platforms. So yeah, appreciate the opportunity here. And I think the data that you just shared with us, Chris, will really lead us into some of the things we'll talk about. They're a great tee up, and we'll refer back to some of those. And one thing I'll sort of say, at Cantata, we, obviously we serve the professional services community. Professional services are people-powered businesses, we like to describe it. And so some of the statistics you shared about talent and employees, I think are critical, and we'll touch on those as we go. So let me dive in here on the professional services life cycle. As you kind of see on the screen here, it's obviously a safe assumption that many of our attendees here are very familiar with this. Begins with pre-sales activities through delivery to post-delivery activities such as invoicing, billing, collection, all to simply repeat over and over, rinse and repeat. That's what our customers and our clients talk about and do every day. The technology needs of a professional services organization are very unique. A services business is reliant not just upon projects, but revenue generating, client facing projects, reliant upon resources. We just touched on the people, really highly and specifically skilled expertise, resources that need to align precisely with, both current and upcoming client demands. It creates a very unique challenge and something that requires a unique focus. Certainly to be successful, you need to accelerate value for both yourself and your clients at every stage of that professional services project lifecycle. So not just project delivery, but the critical steps leading up to delivery, such as planning, estimating, staffing, billing, analyzing, and forecasting, that ensure project delivery is efficient, successful, and profitable. Is a number of needs there that have to be hit on, and providing and using the right technology is critical to that. to be successful, you need to ensure availability of the right resources at the right times and maximize how you utilize those resources. Lastly, to be successful, you need to understand and align, the finances of each project, and that's sort of the to complete the life cycle we see on the screen there. The services life cycle is complex. When teams don't get it right, it doesn't just impact the bottom line, it impacts client and employee satisfaction. Something really important that you just touched on, Chris. We saw that data earlier, that technology stack is a strategic differentiator as it pertains to employee satisfaction and engagement. Something that's really, really critical. And you talked about sort of the, post-COVID or pandemic era of we see lots of services being delivered remote. That's certainly been an evolution and a change accelerated in the pandemic. And so that technology stack is even more important in order to ensure that we deliver on the professional services lifecycle. So, coordinating that lifecycle, across teams is hard on one project, but many of our businesses, of course, here today are doing it across multiple projects and multiple clients simultaneously, and doing it with legacy tools and other things are create a really difficult challenge. And it's a table stakes challenge for services leaders and services business, to find the technology that aligns these efforts and impacts decisions on profitability, client satisfaction, employee attention. It really has to be a win-win situation for both you as the services organization and your clients as well. It can't be done in silos. It can't be done using generic approaches. It requires looking for solutions that apply a true, vertical domain expertise and a proven track record of transforming outcomes. So, as we move forward here in the webinar, we'll see as we dive deeper, we'll explore how our vertical solution can help address many of these challenges, and we'll dive more into that.
Just before we move on to the next question, I'll bring you, Grant, in a minute. Ken, maybe, you touched on scale there. Maybe you can say just a little bit more about that. So, obviously, consolidation across a project lifecycle, but to your point, many companies are having to do this at significant scale. Maybe give us a sense from amongst some of Cantata's larger enterprise customers what that scale looks like. Like what does a really large customer look like from a portfolio scale point of view?
Yeah, I would say you've got hundreds, if not thousands, of consultants, and I'd say one more challenging aspect to that is the resource planning aspect. And being able to coordinate that. We often see customers come to us that are managing this on spreadsheets, and really you make a change here, and now you've got to change if you're using disparate solutions. Grant will talk more about that coming up here, but the cascading effects of that are really, really challenging, which is why when we are talking to our customers about bringing in a solution, that's probably the most transformative part of it is the planning aspect of, hey, if I need to add a resource to this project, I may have to take someone else off somewhere else, and there's a domino effect of that, which make it very, very difficult if you're off in 5 different platforms to do that.
Yeah, great point. So Grant, maybe we can bring you in here, and let me just ask you a question. So, paint a picture for us. What was old world looking like, in your experience, and what were the downsides for Vizient when operating out of these different point solutions, maybe legacy systems? What were the struggles? What were the impacts?
Yeah, thanks. So Vizient, we started using Cantata in 2016, and it was at the tail end of a merger of 2 fairly large services organizations, and those organizations had their own legacy systems that covered project management, financials, time entry. They were all in different systems. So when you combine the 2 organizations together, you have 3 or 4 systems on one side, you have 3 or 4 systems on another side. So our data and our process was all over the place. And the first thing that we really needed to understand as a newly combined organization is how does each one of these service lines perform? We had some unique service lines on either side. We had some service lines that were part of both companies, and we really wanted to understand who was the best of breed in whatever that particular area was. But we really couldn't do it. We had no information other than just anecdotal conversation. Our leaders thought, this particular service line was one of our top performers. They thought this particular service line was maybe one of our lower performers. But again, it was all anecdotal. It wasn't based on any data or fact whatsoever. And so I think that's the big challenge when you have all of these different systems, is you really don't have any grasp whatsoever on how your business, how your resources, how your projects are performing. And you can't make informed decisions and long-term plans for how you're going to grow your business over a 3 to 5 to 7 year period, because you don't know what the baseline is. So it really wasn't until we started exploring tools, realizing we had no visibility whatsoever into how the business was performing, and we needed a tool that could consolidate all of this stuff together. It wasn't until we actually went down the path of implementing the tool, building the processes, aligning the people, aligning the technology, and focusing on the data that we could answer all of those questions. So it was, from the time that we integrated these two organizations together, it was probably a year to a year and a half before we got to the point where we felt like we actually had a grasp on how we were performing.
And so the bringing of the two companies together was the sort of stimulus. So what were the sort of prevailing challenges that people were talking about sort of leading up to that? And you kind of mentioned as you kicked off that sort of explanation of the situation you went through, that each of the domain leaders, or certainly different stakeholders maybe had their own preferred solutions. How did you sort of navigate that? How did you go through the process of making the case for a sort of consolidation? And inevitably, I'm guessing that meant certain people didn't get what they wanted, like at least initially, as you kick-started that.
Yeah, there was certainly a lot of challenge in getting people off of their legacy systems and tools, which included some homegrown solutions. It included tools that we subscribed to. It included Outlook, Excel. We had all sorts of different ways that we were managing our services organization. But the biggest driver for why we went down this path of consolidation was that we really needed to understand where our resources were, what they were working on, because the worst thing we could do is sell work and then not be able to deliver it because we didn't have the right people at the right time. So it was really focused on resource management. That was the driving factor. Secondarily, I would say, because we were combining these two organizations together and trying to get a sense for what our strategies around growth were, we had to understand our financial performance on projects. You can get, any organizational leader will get a P&L from their finance partners. But within that, you can't really tell what are the driving factors around that financial performance. You really have to get into individual resources and individual projects and understand how those are performing, and then how they aggregate into your overall P&L. So again, just trying to make sure that we were effectively utilizing all of our resources, and then we were delivering high value on our projects. Those were the driving factors around consolidation of tools.
I guess the sum of those things, is the experience you provide for customers. Like, how much did that, point of view come in terms of, working backwards from the customer? What actually do we need to provide them? How are their expectations changing? What does value mean when it comes to, a client's overall experience of having worked with us? What was some of that thinking?
Yeah, the type of value that we drive for our customers is tied to specific financial objectives. So we know that we have a financial imperative for our customers that we have to meet. And in order to meet that, we have to be able to start the work when we sell it and meet the client's expectations around when the work begins. Because they have, we support hospitals, and hospitals have all sorts of financial challenges year after year after year. And so it's really important, when we sell a project and we say we're going to start it within 30 or 60 days. It's really important that we do that, because the longer we delay in beginning that work, the more financial cost it is to that customer. So we had to know that the work that we were selling could be staffed. So if we think about the customer's end goal, if it's to save them $20 million, we know in order to achieve $20 million, it's going to take us 12, 18, 24 months, 50, 60, 70 resources working full time on that project. So if we think about the end state of that final statement of $20 million of achieved savings for one of our customers, it's a long planning process for us to get to the point where we can start the work and have an actual project plan and resource team to deliver that, iteratively over a period of potentially 2 or 3 years.
Yeah. Ken, I'm guessing this is reflecting a lot of what you hear from, different of Kantata's customers. Are you sort of seeing many of the same dynamics and strains and drivers?
Yeah, no question about it. I'd like to hit on a couple of things here. One, Grant, we certainly didn't practice this, but he hit on the point that I made previous to around resource management. It's no mistake that it's kind of right in the middle here. We refer to this as the hairball, at Cantata, because all these things are so intertwined and connected to each other. It's really hard to, for a services organization to take an individual, say, resource management tool or BI tool or project management tool and really look at your end-to-end view and know those dependencies and the impacts of changes in that environment. So, it's so critical. There's something that Grant said early on this slide here that really resonates with me, and I'll take it from a slightly different perspective. He talked about sort of the analytics and the metrics and really just understanding, what the business looks like as someone who's responsible for, delivery and building of our products. I look at it very similar way. There's a lot of parallels to draw here, and it comes to, having the best tools to give you visibility into the performance of your team. And that really resonates, quite well, with our customers, and it resonates with me personally, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting that you both sort of highlight this so prominently. As I think about, more widely across different technology areas we cover, this has all come into the conversation in a way that it wasn't sort of 4 or 5 years ago. Analytics, understanding best practice, creating new metrics for teams that previously, weren't driven by metrics orientations, even resource management, which, has always been a sort of prevailing concern amongst sort of project and portfolio management domains, is now being talked about in the context of sort of more horizontal kind of knowledge work. Companies need to be more agile, and they need to be more business outcome focused. And obviously a huge part of that in any kind of knowledge industry, service industry is, it starts with your resource. So all of these things have become more prominent, I think. So Ken, maybe we stay with you and just seg into the next question. So, we've talked about some of the pain points with the hairball, some of the drivers to looking for more kind of converged, consolidated solutions. So what does that actually look like for professional services, and what makes it particularly appropriate for this kind of industry?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I'm going to start with one thing because I think it really helps transition from the last topic, and really it's, if you look at this, obviously we've been looking at the services lifecycle and layering. We layered that hairball on top. We've kind of layered now the Cantata cloud on top of this. I'd like to look at the center of the bullseye, because I think it hits on a point that Grant was talking about, which is really business intelligence and insights. It's the data. It's how is my team performing? How is my business performing? The financial management, all of it converges into the center. And so I think that's a really critical piece of that. But we'll zoom out a little bit here and look at this as a whole. So obviously this is a familiar diagram. We've seen it a few times. We've superimposed the Cantata Cloud on top of here. And really what we're talking about here with the vertical solution is converging what are often disparate technologies, such as time management and expense management, resource management, project and work management, billing and revenue recognition, business intelligence we were just talking about there, into a holistic, what we call an industry cloud, to allow businesses to better manage, the correlation of their resources, their work, and their revenue. The Cantata Cloud, it's a cloud that was purpose-built for the professional services industry by professional services leaders. Grant talked about mergers and merging of two companies before. Many people here probably know that, Cantata is also the merging of a couple of companies together. And so that's something, that we know that exists in the industry, and it's something that we, hope to account for as well in our platform. And our two organizations, Kimball and MavenLink, that came together for Cantata, were both founded, via professional service people in the industry. And so, we've been able to capture and implement that PS lifecycle because we've walked a mile or 1,000 miles in the shoes of our customers and understand what they're trying to deliver to their clients, and the interdependencies, which we've already kind of talked about a little bit of, balancing things like time and resources. So, cascading effects, handled by Cantata, for example, inevitable changes to sales, delivery, accounting. You make a change to a project, you need to understand how that change impacts your other projects, your general availability of resources, your timelines for other projects, because as Grant told us, often, our customers are often looking, at how does that impact their finances, because there's a financial goal in every project that has to be met. And it's about bringing that visibility and understanding that full life cycle and giving that vertical solution to do that. So, it's something that's not really achievable with pulling individual point solutions together. A change in one area should be reflected through others. That should be, immediately reflected and understood. And don't underestimate the impact of users. Chris, you talked about sort of the breadth of solutions, and what we haven't mentioned by name, but it's been sort of implied here, is digital transformation, right? The advent of all these tools, and really that puts a lot of strain on the users, both our project management users, our end users, our consultants. And learning, multiple point solutions is, we shouldn't underestimate the impact of that. There's a lot of smart people that are managing these projects and executing these projects, but they have a certain amount of capacity, and learning multiple platforms. It's difficult and challenging, and keeping up with that is a challenge. So a vertical solution like the Cantata Cloud will help to limit that scope, reduce that burden overall. I do want to make a special call out here. There's a circle, the outermost circle inside of the life cycle. They are the integrations and workflows, because it's so critical. That while we're saying that we want to be a vertical solution and touch on all the things that are there, we also want to best integrate into our customers' environments and allow them to operate their business as usual and leverage other tools that they have and need. And so, we're showing connections to things like general ledger, ERP, CRM, HCM solutions. The intention, the purpose of the Cantata Cloud is to be a vertical solution, but we want to fit that environment that works best for our customers. Integrations are key, to best serve your needs, key workflows, critical data, that all needs to be maintained and synchronized between business systems. And that has to be in either a real-time or a near real-time fashion. So when I, create a project in this other platform, I want that project to show up in Cantata, or vice versa. When a new employee is added to the organization, I want to have to add that employee in Cantata as well. I want that employee to, immediately show up if I add that in my HCM system. So those integrations are really key overall. And, really, what we hear from customers so much is that they're they're really beyond point solutions, and they want this vertical solution. When they come to us, really asking for our help and help them, manage their business, that's what we hear often overall, and really is the spirit of what we've built and what we continue to build and adapt to our customer needs and requirements.
Yeah. Grant, maybe we can bring you in here and maybe just help contextualize, the setting that you have in Vision around, how you leverage these different kind of capabilities. You've talked really interestingly about, some of the pain points you had and sort of what old world looked like and some of the drivers that led you to think about this in a more consolidated sense. Give us a sense of like how in Vision you sort of leverage these different kind of capabilities on the platform.
Sure. So on our services side, we use all of the capabilities around project management, team collaboration, financial management, but we also have those integrations that Ken talked about with the CRM, the HCM, and the ERP. And we do that because we have enterprise accounting and finance and HR functions that use their tools, but we need their data. So we integrate with them bidirectionally so that we can receive the data that we need, and then we can send data to teams like accounting so they can use that for billing and revenue recognition. But it's not really just the data, the reason that we have those integrations with those other tools. It's also the user experience, because there are things that have to happen within the HCM or within the CRM or the ERP that we don't want to have our users replicating in two different systems. So as an example, our employees are required to do all of their expense reports in our ERP. We need those expense reports and that data in Cantata so that we can track profitability on our engagements. So we don't want them entering it twice, right? So it's a logical integration to say you do your expense report in the ERP and then it sends it over to Cantata for project reporting. So we are focused definitely on the data because we need it to run the business, but we also don't want to have duplicated efforts. We don't want to have negative user experiences because of having to do things in multiple systems. So the integrations piece for us has been huge in our success in using the tool.
Say, I guess, just riff that. What would you say the conversations have been like with, your stakeholders in those other departments whose data that you need? So whether that's someone in finance or, someone in legal, maybe, what is the kind of conversation or maybe like when, you were talking about needing some of that data from their systems? Like, I'm guessing, that's just a different conversation when you go from old world, lots of fragmented solutions, to new world, one consolidated platform. What was their take on what you were trying to do?
It's not easy. Anybody who's ever had to integrate with an ERP or a CRM or an HCM knows that those teams that own those tools have processes that they follow and they have expectations for their teams. And it's more than just connecting the systems together. Like you can connect the systems together, but if the processes on either side aren't compatible, then the data that flows between the systems isn't going to make sense. So it's been a challenge, honestly, because as we integrate with an ERP, we have to work with our accounting department and make sure that their processes and the way that they capture all of their information in our ERP is compatible with what we're doing in Maven Link. Cantata. So it's a matter of synchronizing both sides, which again, when you have these legacy departments who have operated a certain way for years and years and years, trying to get them to think in newer terms and how they can change their process so that it benefits us. And then in turn, the benefit to us allows us to send better data back to them. It ultimately benefits them. So it's kind of helping them understand the end result and what's in it for them. It's not so much just, hey, we need you to change this process because we need your data. It's, we need you to change this process so that we can get your data and we can transform your data and send it back to you in an automated way that saves your team a lot of time and trouble in analyzing and interpreting that data so they can do things like invoice our customers correctly, right? We want to make sure that we do really good high value work for our customers, but we absolutely want to make sure that they get billed correctly for those services. And this is kind of a give and take partnership with those departments.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting, and it's sort of why I tried to allude in my sort of brief presentation at the start of this how much of a mindset shift this is, because this does involve, I think, a different set of conversations. Stepping back and taking a different perspective on what value means here, both internally amongst stakeholders, but also obviously with the value provided to customers. So really appreciate those insights. I guess a couple additional questions to you, Grant, just before we head into the open Q&A with the audience. So I guess first question, what is the next frontier for yourselves in Vizion in terms of how you leverage this approach? Are there any things that you aren't doing now that you're planning to?
I think the next frontier for us, which we're actually excited about, the merger between Mavenlink and Kimball, is the next frontier for us is how do we actually tie together our CRM and our PSA solution. So we've obviously integrated our CRM with Cantata today, but the next step is actually having them exist within the same environment. Right now, there's bifurcation between what our sales team can see within the CRM and what our delivery team can see within the PSA. And as Vizion is evolving and changing its strategy over the next few years, there's becoming more and more blurred lines between those who sell and those who deliver. So for us, it's really looking at how do we take this a step forward and consolidate these two really critical systems and functions together. We also just have continued challenges around our customers expecting us to deliver higher value for less cost. So I think every professional services organization experiences this, and so it's a matter of taking the tools that we have and the processes that we've established that have been good for us for the last 5 or 6 years and figuring out how do we transform them so that we can actually deliver that value for our customers in a way that is efficient and profitable for us. Because the reality is the expectations are higher on our customer side, but it still requires the same resource base to deliver the work. And said another way, it requires the same investment from a cost standpoint. So we have to figure out how do we get more efficient at scoping, more effective at scoping and pricing new work, and then managing that scope of work all the way throughout the duration of the engagement to make sure that we can deliver those goals for our customers, but do it in a way that's profitable for us as well. Yeah.
And that's all, really good context to seg into the last question I'll put to you as well, Grant, before we head into the open Q&A. So, what would you say to a leader in another organization that was in maybe a similar position that you were in before you started down this path, but who was potentially worried about, having these conversations, making this shift, potentially the extra scrutiny that they might receive at the moment around any new tech investments, which we know is the case for many companies given the sort of macroeconomic situation. How would you advise someone build the business case for making the change now that you made, when you started on this?
Yeah, I would say
what advice would you give them?
The best time to do this is always 2 years ago, because you want to get to a point where you have the actual data and fact to make these logical business decisions versus everything being anecdotal. So, if you think forward about where you want your business to be 2, 3, 5 years from now, you really have to start now. The longer you wait, the longer it is that you actually see the gains that we've seen in our usage of a consolidated professional services tool. So, for us, it probably took 12 to 18 months of using the tool, gathering data for us to actually analyze it and understand what are those things that we do really well. I mentioned this before. Some of the things that we anecdotally said we did really well, we actually found out we didn't do all that well. And then other things that we anecdotally thought we didn't do that well, we found were actually quite profitable for us. So getting the data in place and the processes in place gives you that ability to analyze your business and then start making changes to your business. So 12, 18, 24 months into our use of a consolidated PSA solution, we were able to actually start maximizing those things we do well, working on the things that we didn't do well, and even in some cases, cutting some offerings that we had that just weren't good for Vizion from a P&L standpoint. And the end result of that is that our a lot of different metrics that you can measure for professional services, but the one we look at very frequently is revenue per hour. So we, over the course of 3 or 4 years, we increased our revenue per hour per consultant by 50%. So when you talk about justification and investments in technology, when you have the same number of resources being able to deliver 50% more revenue, that's your justification in and of itself. And depending on the size of the organization, that could be hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in not only revenue, but margin, because it falls straight to the bottom line.
Yeah, fantastic. You couldn't want for a better justification, I think, as you're building that kind of business case. So Ken and Grant, really appreciate your perspectives through this. Let's open this up to Q&A from the audience. Malik, let us know what is being asked.
Thanks, Chris. It's now time for our Q&A session. Just a quick reminder, if you have a question, simply type it in the question box on your screen. The first question I have is there a danger that in embracing this shift, an enterprise platform tries to converge too many disparate capabilities, leading to functionality in certain areas that truly can't match up to the best of breed level?
Chris, would you like to take that first? Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I'll just chime in and give a few perspectives on that. Yeah, I mean, there is a danger with any approach. There's challenges with any approach. We're moving, like I said earlier, from this sort of, what has been, to be honest, quite a slightly wild westish approach that many companies have had to tussle with, which is, lots of new applications, being adopted by, maybe different parts of the business with, maybe not the visibility around who's adopting what that would be useful. And, that, as we've talked about it at some length, poses all kinds of challenges. On the flip side of that, of course, there might be the challenge if you go into more of a consolidated kind of approach of, maybe sacrificing some of the capabilities that aren't part of that platform that don't need to be, but you still need to leverage. And so that's partly why I talk about this hub and spokes mentality. This is really where we see from a lot of the research we do amongst enterprises, where their mind is landing. So they're thinking about, what are those strategic systems that we need? What is the value that they're providing to us? What are the workflows that these kind of platforms need to substantiate for our users? And then what are those other capabilities where, it's best placed for them to be in a separate application? It could be another business system like a CRM system. It could just be a more niche point solution that maybe either your platform doesn't have the capability, or maybe it doesn't have the extent of the capability that you need, in which case, you have to think about integrations and what those different spokes are. So, there are certainly dangers to this, but I think, we've come from an era where, companies have had to think a lot about how to make integrations. The challenge was that there were just such a fragmented environment. It was difficult to have a center of gravity to make really valuable integrations from a workflow and collaboration point of view. Into this kind of new era, I think companies are looking for what those center of gravity systems are. So I think the integration set of considerations slightly easier. So that's where we kind of see enterprises in terms of their mindset at the moment.
Yeah, and maybe I'd love to give the Cantata perspective on this. Agree with everything Chris just said. Being in the R&D function on the product and engineering area of the business, this is something that we think a lot about. We obviously have a finite amount of development capacity, and how we apply that development capacity in terms of what features we build into the product. I mean, you heard from Grant that they're doing expenses outside of Cantata, but synchronizing it in. And I said earlier, like we're aiming to fit into our customers' environments. We do hear from customers from time to time, that there's new features that may exist in best of breed point solutions. we're not looking to build something that competes directly with them, but build something that meets maybe the demands of majority of our customers, but not all of our customers. I'll give you a good example is that in the Cantata OX product, we've built in a function for Kanban boards, because we know that our services businesses operate. This is something near and dear to my heart as an engineering leader, that use Kanban and Scrum and other methodologies. We've built a feature into the product that, and we'll continue to refine that. But we're extremely customer centric, in that we're constantly listening to the needs and evaluating the features we roll out and whether they've landed well with our customers, and having that startup mentality of being able to build something. The minimum viable product terminology isn't one that's well embraced anymore. I've heard the term minimum lovable product, and so when we add features like that, we're looking to make something minimally lovable, and then work from there and get feedback. And so there is a risk, from our side, that we invest in something that may or may not land right, but we're not trying to do everything for everyone. We're trying to land with the right features and functionality that serve the needs of our customers in whole, and integrate otherwise.
Thanks, guys. The next question I have is, adopting a solution that touches a lot of different workflows and departments has potential to upset a lot of apple carts. Grant, did you face any objections as you were building a business case to move away from these 5 solutions? And how did you accommodate or overcome those objections?
Yes, we did face objections. We faced objections from pretty much the entire life cycle of delivering an engagement, from our consultants to our project leaders to our service line leaders to our corporate partners like accounting and finance and HR. It was resistance all around, and I think each one had their own perspective. Consultants, mostly because in previous tools that they weren't really held accountable to tracking time and utilization and managing their tasks within a system that had a lot of visibility. So there was resistance around that, simply because the visibility that it created into what they were doing. From a project lead standpoint, that we got resistance from them, because managing work in a sophisticated and well-designed tool actually increased the administrative work that they had to do as a project lead on an engagement. So we got pushback on that. I think the most pushback we got on this was from some of our service line leaders who knew that the day that we implemented a consolidated tool that brought all of this together was the first day that they were no longer going to be able to provide their own metrics, their own updates on performance of their particular areas. And I've talked about this a couple of times already, where just through conversation, we would talk about certain things that went really well, and we had really overachieving in this area, and this team was fully utilized. And what we found was that the truth was completely different than what our leaders had been saying. So there was a lot of resistance there from our leaders, because again, it didn't allow them to tell the story about how their teams were performing. The data told the story. And then, like we've talked about with some of our corporate partners, the pushback from there was on integrations, right? Trying to convince them to let our system touch their system and pull their data out and then push data back into theirs. There's naturally resistance there that we had to work through. But I think the solution to all of it, across all of those various perspectives, was investing the time. You can't underestimate change management when you're implementing a tool like this. So it was really investing the time in each one of those personas or each one of those perspectives, and helping them understand that yes, it is going to look and feel a little bit different. Maybe you have to do your work differently than you have in the past, but the benefit to a consultant is that the work is more organized. It can be more predictable. For a project lead, it's yes, there's a little bit more administrative work that you have to do around planning and approving time cards and managing your budget, but the end result of that is that you're delivering more successful projects. For our service line leaders, it's know that the story may not tell, or the data may not tell the story that you hoped it would, but what it allows you to do is actually start to make significant strategic changes in how you manage your teams and how you deliver your work. And then again, like we talked about with our corporate partners and the systems that we integrate with, it's a matter of helping them understand that the data that they're giving us allows us to improve their processes, to make them more efficient, more accurate. And it's just a lot of conversations. It's a lot of, giving them time to come to terms with it and listening to their thoughts and feelings. And again, just pushing through, doing the right thing and hoping, and I think in our case, it proved to be true, just hoping one day they see the value in what you're doing. It's not easy though.
Thanks. That concludes our virtual roundtable for today. Thank you, Chris, Ken, and Grant. As a reminder, the on-demand version of this event will be available shortly. On behalf of Cantata, Vizient, and S&P Global Market Intelligence, thank you for attending and have a great day.